Today, we'll be looking at 4 of the most horrifying caving incidents you've probably never heard of. Stories where brave explorers got wedged so tightly into the rock, it defied the limits of what a human body can endure. We're talking about limbs twisted in impossible angles, breathing room measured in inches, and panic so intense it nearly drove people insane. These aren't just accidents. These are brutal claustrophobic nightmares where one wrong move sealed their fate. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Our first story takes place in the winding caves of northern Georgia, specifically Pigeon Mountain's Ellison's Cave, one of the deepest and most treacherous caves in the continental U.S. Known for its vertical shafts and unforgiving terrain, this is not a place for beginners. And yet, on July 15, 2014, 2 brothers, 18-year-old Caleb Foster and his older brother Daniel, 23, decided to tackle it anyway. They weren't totally unprepared. Daniel had done a few caves before, mostly small ones. Caleb, on the other hand, was brand new to it all. This was his first vertical cave, and Ellison's Cave was unforgiving, even for seasoned cavers. The brothers had heard of a formation called the Tight Side Passage, an infamous squeeze that was barely talked about in guidebooks. It wasn't part of the main route, but a few online forums mentioned it as a fun challenge for anyone daring, or foolish enough to try it. Caleb, excited and eager to impress his brother, insisted they check it out. They located the entrance to the side passage after descending into the main shaft and navigating about 1,000 feet into the cave system. The passage was harmless at first, just a low tunnel carved through soft limestone. It gradually narrowed as they crawled in, the walls pulling in tighter, the floor angling downward. Daniel hesitated, uncertainty creeping in as he glanced at the dark tunnel ahead. They didn't know how far it went, and the thought of getting stuck gnawed at him. But Caleb, already moving with an eager grin on his face, slipped forward, undeterred by the narrow passage. He seemed to treat it like a game, confident he'd only go a little ways before turning back. The sound of his movements echoed softly, blending with the eerie silence around them. The squeeze narrowed fast. The ceiling lowered until Caleb had to flatten his arms against his sides just to slide forward. The walls pinched around his chest and hips. Still, he pressed ahead. He believed if he could just get around the next bend, it would widen up again. He was wrong. The passage curved downward and hooked to the left like a fishhook. Caleb didn't see the full shape until it was too late. The rock bent his spine at an unnatural angle as he tried to slither around the curve. His knees wouldn't follow, his back locked. He tried to twist, but there was no room. His body began to wedge. At first, it was manageable, uncomfortable, sure, but nothing he couldn't push through. Then the panic hit. He sucked in a breath and realized he couldn't fully expand his chest. Every inhale felt thinner. Every exhale felt like a countdown. He tried backing out, but the way the curve bent his body, he couldn't reverse it. His hips were caught, and the way his legs were positioned, any movement only lodged him deeper. The rock had him now. He shouted for Daniel, his voice muffled, bouncing awkwardly off the contorted stone around him. Daniel scrambled toward the entrance of the side passage. He could hear Caleb, but he couldn't see him. "Back out! Crawl backward!" he yelled. "I can't!" Caleb screamed, his voice high and raw. Daniel dropped to his belly and began crawling in. The passage was already tight, but he made it a few feet before reaching the bend. That's where he saw it. Caleb's feet were barely visible, his boots twitching as he tried to free himself. The rest of his body was swallowed by the rock. Daniel realized, with growing horror, that Caleb was wedged in a position where his legs were twisted sideways, and his chest was compressed against a curve that left him almost upside down. "Try to move your hips! Twist left!" Daniel shouted. "I can't breathe!" Caleb gasped. Daniel tried pulling at his brother's legs, but nothing gave. The angle of the passage meant any pulling just compressed Caleb more. Time passed in minutes that felt like hours. Caleb's breathing got worse. The curve had locked his ribcage, forcing his lungs to work double just to take in air. His face, now slick with sweat, was pressed sideways against cold rock. His helmet had fallen off somewhere behind him. His left arm was pinned behind his back. His right hand clawed at the rock helplessly. Daniel had no signal, no GPS, no radio. They were deep underground, and no one else knew where they were. "I'm gonna get help," Daniel said, his voice shaking. "No, don't leave me, please." Caleb's voice was weaker now. Daniel hesitated. Every instinct told him to stay, but without help, his brother was going to die right there in the rock. He gave Caleb his water bottle, maneuvering it to his lips as best he could. Then he slowly backed out, his heart pounding loudly in his chest. It took Daniel over 40 minutes just to make it back to the entrance. He ran barefoot now, his boots shredded from the rock, down the mountain trail to the nearest ranger station. What followed was a full-scale rescue operation that mobilized over 24 specialized cave rescuers from surrounding states. But even for them, the situation was dire. The passage Caleb was trapped in was so narrow that only the slimmest rescuers could make it to him. And even then, they couldn't reach his upper body. They tried everything, pulling gently on his legs, drilling into the rock around the curve, even bringing in a specialized air tube to keep him breathing. But hours passed without any success. Caleb was still alive, but barely. The position he was stuck in, head at a downward angle, chest compressed, legs twisted behind him, was slowly cutting off the blood flow. His heart was working overtime. One rescuer described it as trying to pump uphill with a collapsed lung. He was starting to lose consciousness, slipping in and out, hallucinating from the pain and lack of oxygen. They tried to chisel the rock away, but the vibrations only worsened his condition. One wrong move could crush his chest entirely. Finally, after 27 hours trapped in the passage, Caleb's breathing stopped. The rescuers couldn't reach far enough to perform CPR. He died wedged inside the rock. Daniel was inconsolable. He had to be physically restrained from trying to crawl back in himself. For 3 days, rescuers debated how, or even if, they could recover Caleb's body. But the decision was eventually made to seal the passage. They marked the location, leaving a plaque at the entrance. To this day, Caleb Foster's body remains inside the tight side passage of Ellison's cave, his final resting place entombed in stone. Moving on to the next story. What happens when no one even knows you're trapped? When you descend into the earth alone, and the only thing left behind is silence? Our second story takes us to the high desert plains of Arizona, where volcanic activity millions of years ago left behind an extensive network of lava tubes, most of them undocumented, rarely explored, and extremely dangerous. Local hikers and amateur cavers knew of one in particular, buried beneath the Coconino National Forest, known only by a nickname, the Manhole Corkscrew, a vertical lava shaft shaped like a spiraling helix. Narrow, steep, and dropping over 60 feet into blackness. It was a geological marvel and a death trap. In September 2017, 21-year-old geology student Alex Hargrove heard about the corkscrew shaft from a fellow student during a weekend field trip. An adventurous climber and amateur videographer, Alex was always chasing the next unique shot for his YouTube channel. So after a long day of hiking, he convinced a few friends to check it out. The group found the entrance, just a cracked hole in the ground, partially hidden by brush. Alex lowered himself in with a climbing harness and headlamp, eager to get footage from inside the formation. It was supposed to be a quick in and out, but then his GoPro slipped. He was adjusting the mount on his helmet when the camera popped free, bounced off the stone, and tumbled into the abyss, clattering down the spiral shaft and vanishing into darkness. "I'm going after it," he said, laughing nervously. His friends begged him not to, said they'd come back with better gear, but Alex insisted. "I won't go far," he promised. He disappeared down the hole alone. The spiral shaft was tight. It coiled like a snake, each revolution dropping deeper into the ground. The walls were made of rough, razor-edged basalt that tore at his clothes and skin with every movement. He used a small rope to guide himself, inching down the rock like a screw being twisted into the earth. The shaft's shape was deceptive. What started as a walkable spiral quickly turned into a narrow conical funnel. The walls angled inward, closing around him as he descended. But Alex was focused on the glint of his GoPro below, lodged in a small crack just 20 feet farther down. He could reach it, he was sure of it. He stretched, his fingers grazing the camera, then he slipped. It wasn't far, just a few inches, but it was enough. His weight shifted, his hips slid past a narrow ring of rock. His thighs wedged instantly into the V-shaped funnel. The rough basalt gripped his legs like a vice. He tried to adjust, twist his hips, reposition, but the shaft was curved, bending his torso backward, arching his spine against the stone. He was stuck, badly stuck. He tried to pull himself up, but nothing budged. He pushed with his arms, scraped his elbows raw against the stone. Still nothing. The conical spiral he'd entered had become a stone funnel, and he was the cork. His legs were compressed at the thighs. His knees were trapped beneath him. His chest bent backward in a fetal curve, one that crushed his diaphragm and forced shallow, wheezing breaths. He tried yelling. The sound barely echoed. The tight spiral muffled everything, absorbing his voice into dead silence. He screamed louder. Nothing. And that's when he realized no one knew he was stuck. His friends were still outside the entrance, assuming he'd return any second. They couldn't see him. They couldn't hear him. After 15 minutes of silence, the group assumed Alex had found another exit or was pulling a prank. So they packed up and drove off, expecting to see him the next day at camp. But Alex was 20 feet underground, contorted in a death spiral. The pain in his legs turned to numbness. The blood flow was being slowly cut off by the compression. His feet began to tingle, then turned cold. His breathing was short and fast now, every inhale harder than the last. His back muscles started spasming from the strain of the curve. He tried lifting himself with his arms, but his position had robbed them of all leverage. As time passed, the low oxygen made him start to hallucinate. The air in the shaft grew stale, and his light began to dim. By the time a few hours passed, his legs were purple and bloated. He could no longer feel them. The crushing V of the shaft had become a tourniquet, slowly starving his lower body of oxygen. He began to drift in and out of consciousness. The next morning, his friends still hadn't seen him. They assumed he'd hitched a ride back to campus. It wasn't until a full day later, when Alex missed a lecture and didn't respond to texts, that someone finally reported him missing. A search team was dispatched. It took them hours to retrace his steps, but eventually they found the spiral shaft and the rope leading inside. What they discovered horrified everyone. Alex was still there, still stuck. His skin was pale. His body had gone limp. His head drooped against the stone, eyes half open but unseeing. He'd been trapped for nearly 28 hours, with no food, no water, and almost no oxygen circulation in his legs. Rescuers attempted to pull him free, but the shape of the spiral shaft made it nearly impossible. Any vertical movement risked pulling him apart from the torso. They tried cutting away at the stone, but the basalt was too hard. Specialized rescue teams were flown in. They created a pulley system, coated his legs in lubricant, and began the slowest, most delicate reverse extraction imaginable. It took 7 hours to pull him out. When they finally freed his body, his legs were purple, swollen, and unresponsive. Alex survived, but barely. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital, underwent 2 surgeries, and lost most of the tissue in his lower legs due to compartment syndrome, a condition where internal pressure from swelling cuts off circulation and kills the tissue. Doctors managed to save his limbs, but he never walked the same again. The spiral trap had almost claimed him. To this day, the manhole corkscrew remains unmarked, unregulated, and open to anyone foolish enough to descend. Alex never returned, and neither has anyone else. At least, not that we know of. We've seen what happens when you get wedged horizontally. But what if you're trapped vertically, head first, with gravity dragging you deeper by the minute? That brings us to our next, and possibly most disturbing, story yet. This one happened deep in the Andes Mountains of Peru, inside a cave system known locally as La Garganta de la Tierra, the throat of the earth. Few maps exist. Fewer people dare enter. At over 12,000 feet elevation, this cave doesn't just mess with your nerves, it messes with your oxygen levels, your blood pressure, and your ability to think clearly, which is exactly what made it so appealing to 27-year-old travel blogger Mia Reyes. Mia was fearless. Her blog, Trailblazer Diaries, was filled with videos of her hanging off cliffs in Thailand, trekking through snake-infested jungles, and ziplining across volcanoes in Costa Rica. She wasn't reckless, just addicted to the adrenaline of firsts. In March 2023, she got a tip from a Peruvian hiker about a hidden vertical tunnel in La Garganta. "If you're brave," he said, "and small enough, there's a secret room you can only access by crawling through it head first." That was all Mia needed to hear. She documented the start of the journey on her phone, smiling, excited, geared up with a harness, GPS tracker, and a helmet cam. She even pinged her location to her cloud server. "If I go missing," she joked, "you'll know where to look." It was supposed to be another blog post. Instead, it became her last entry. The shaft was vertical, narrow, and twisted. Unlike the spirals from before, this one dropped straight down, and then, about 20 feet in, angled sharply into an upside-down crawl space, just barely big enough for a human body. The idea was to enter head first, use gravity to slide through the funnel, and emerge into a hidden chamber. But what Mia didn't know was that halfway through the crawl, the walls pinched inward, just enough to trap someone at the shoulders. And once you're wedged upside down, there's no easy way back. At first, everything seemed fine. Her helmet light flickered against wet limestone as she slid in, boots sticking out of the shaft above her. The crawl space narrowed fast. She sucked in her breath, trying to squeeze forward. Then came the mistake. As she shifted her weight to reach farther and dropped just 2 inches, she heard a clicking sound as her shoulders jammed into the limestone funnel, hard. She tried to twist, one arm pinned under her body, the other stuck at her side, her helmet pressed into her chest, chin crushed down against her sternum. There was no room to look up, no way to shift backward. She was stuck upside down. At first she panicked, fought hard, grunted and twisted and screamed. But the more she struggled, the more difficult her position became. Her torso locked in place. Her neck twisted at a horrible angle. One boot scraped helplessly against the stone above her, kicking, searching for traction. She had air, but not much. And time, even less. Within 20 minutes, the blood began to rush to her head. Fast. Her face flushed red. Her eyes throbbed. Her vision blurred. Upside-down entrapment is one of the most lethal positions a body can endure. It causes pressure to build in the brain, restricts oxygen, and can lead to unconsciousness and death in less than an hour if not reversed. Mia's arms were useless. Her helmet dug into her collarbone. Her lungs, crushed just enough by her bent torso to prevent full breaths. And then, she vomited. There are few worse things a person can endure than vomiting upside down. The bile didn't fall. It rose into her mouth, into her nose, almost choking her. She gagged violently, reflexively tried to lift her head, but couldn't. Her helmet kept her locked in place. She gasped and choked again, coughing until she couldn't breathe. Somehow she survived that moment, but she knew she was dying. Her only hope now was the GPS ping she'd sent before entering. Luckily, it worked. When Mia didn't post her next blog update, a friend back in Lima checked her tracker. He saw that she hadn't moved in hours and contacted local authorities. Rescuers were dispatched, but due to the fact that the cave was isolated, the terrain was remote. It took over 6 hours for a team of 4 cavers to reach the entrance and locate the vertical shaft. When they saw her boots sticking out of the hole, hanging limp, they knew it was serious. The rescuers descended carefully, assessing the situation. Mia was semi-conscious, her responses slurred and delayed. Her face was swollen with blood vessels bursting in her eyes from pressure. Now, the main challenge was getting her out without killing her. Yanking her free could snap her neck or cause a stroke. Moving her too fast could dislodge a clot or flood her brain with pooled blood. They rigged a rope and pulley system, but the angle was brutal. There was no leverage inside the shaft. One caver had to go below, wedge himself upside down under her, and rotate her torso by fractions of an inch, loosening the pressure point. It took 2 hours just to get her shoulders unjammed. By the time they had her halfway out, she stopped responding. The rescue team noticed her breathing had stopped. When she was pulled fully out, they laid her on the cave floor and started CPR. But there was still no response. Mia Reyes was declared dead at the scene, a victim of upside-down entrapment after nearly 9 hours in the shaft. Mia's death shook the adventure community. Thousands of fans left tributes on her blog, but experts agreed, no amount of confidence, no level of fitness can protect you from physics. Once gravity turns against you in a cave, you're on the clock. That was the upside-down trap. Brutal, suffocating, and tragically real. We've seen what caves can do, from rock to lava to limestone. But now, imagine you're walking on what looks like solid ground, only to realize too late, it's not even there. It happened in Alaska, inside the Matanuska Glacier ice caves, a surreal, shifting world of translucent blue tunnels, arching ceilings, and meltwater rivers flowing under your feet. These caves aren't solid. They breathe, they melt, they collapse. You don't explore a glacial cave, you negotiate with it. And for 19-year-old Max Turner, a college freshman from Oregon on a summer tour, that negotiation turned into a nightmare. Max wasn't a caver. He wasn't even planning on going inside a glacier until he saw a flyer in Anchorage, Glacial Ice Cave Hike, once-in-a-lifetime experience. He signed up, threw on rental boots and a borrowed helmet, and joined a group of 10 led by an experienced Alaskan guide. At first, the cave was everything the brochure promised: shimmering blue walls, shafts of light pouring through ice domes, cold air thick with silence. The group laughed, took selfies. One girl even lay down to make a snow angel. Then they reached a section the guide called the Shards. It was a massive hall with a flat ice floor stretching 20 feet ahead. The ceiling arched overhead, dripping steadily from meltwater. The surface looked solid, frosted, opaque, and smooth. But beneath some areas, there was nothing but air. The guide warned them to step only where he stepped while walking through, and most of the group listened. But Max, he got distracted. He saw a perfect photo op, an angle with light reflecting off the far wall like a crystal prism, and took one step to the left. That's all it took for it to all come crashing down. The sound was sharp, hollow, then a thunderous snap as the thin ice beneath him shattered. Max dropped instantly, straight down. His body plunged into a vertical razor-thin crevasse, a slot in the glacier just wide enough to catch him by the arms. His ribs slammed against the edge. His backpack was ripped off. His legs dangled into nothingness, meters of black, bottomless cold. He let out a piercing scream, the echoes bouncing off the ice like sonar. The guide rushed to the hole and peered down. Max was wedged tight, his arms pinned over his head, chest compressed between glassy ice walls, his legs invisible in the dark void below. The guide called out for him to try as much as possible to stay still and breathe slowly. But Max couldn't. The pressure on his ribcage made every breath shallow, and worse, the floor was melting beneath him. Water trickled down the walls. The heat from the group's bodies, the sun above the glacier, even the warmth of Max himself, was making the ice soften. Every second he stayed lodged, gravity pulled him deeper. The guide grabbed his harness, but when he tried to pull, Max screamed in pain. "It's crushing me," he gasped. Any more force and his ribs could crack, or worse. As time passed, the cold began to work on him like a silent assassin. His gloves soaked through in minutes. His fingers went numb, then tingly, then nothing. The ice against his cheeks started to burn as his lips turned blue. It wasn't long before he started falling in and out of consciousness. The guide called for emergency glacier rescue. It took them nearly 2 hours to reach the cave, by which point Max had fallen mostly silent. They found him still wedged, unconscious, pulse weak, barely responsive. There was no easy way to extract him. They couldn't just pull. His ribs would collapse. They couldn't wait. His core temperature was plummeting. So they brought in the big tools: ice screws, anchors, heated water packs. They drilled into the surrounding ice, setting up a makeshift anchor system. Then, using tubing, they flushed warm saline water down both sides of the crevasse, just enough to melt and widen the ice. One wrong move, and the wall could collapse entirely. The process took nearly an hour. By then, Max's body was barely reacting. His heart rate slowed. His lips were blackened. He wasn't even responsive anymore. But finally, they managed to shift his position. One side of his ribcage freed, then the hips. And in one agonizing, silent motion, they pulled him out. He was limp, icy, eyes closed. He was airlifted by helicopter within 40 minutes, and somehow, he survived, but not without any damage. The prolonged compression, the blood loss to his limbs, the frostbite in sub-zero temperatures. Max lost full sensation in his right hand. Doctors said the nerves had been too starved of blood for too long. It wasn't amputated, but it would never work quite right again. He survived, but the glacier had left its mark. Max never caved again. He still travels, but never underground, never over ice. Because when you fall into a false floor, you learn one thing the hard way. Nature doesn't care what looks solid, only what is. Every cave has its secrets. Every passageway hides dangers you can't see. And nature never shows mercy. We've learned that the hard way. And while some of these survivors walked out, many never did. If you want to watch more videos on deadly accidents in the world of exploration, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching, and stay safe.